MITxMake is winding down now, but it's definitely not over. We have our last panel on working with nature right now. One of the things we've discussed as a committee when we organized this was it's really interesting that making has been around for thousands of years, and we have seen maker culture as a thing really grow in the past few years. And even though making has been happening for thousands of years, suddenly when maker culture came around, it became quite specifically about robotics and circuits and those stuff. So one of the things we wanted to do is to think about making a little bit more broadly. We know that we can't cover everything with one event, but we thought that talking about working with nature would be a good start. And we're very excited to have invited speakers to talk about making biofabricated leather, making skincare, making biogas digesters, and making cheese. So I want to invite our moderator up onto the stage, and he'll lead us into our discussion. Thank you, Pratik.
Thanks. Thanks, JB. We've had a lot of nice talks and a lot of nice speakers today. I think this is a good way of winding it down by talking about slower things. And I don't mean slow in terms of the work itself, but slow in terms of how the work takes place and the objects that are being created. We're talking about cheese and leather and energy and skincare products. I think the exciting part here is the contrast from robotics and electronics and mechanical things, but we all have the same thread of making going through our work, and I think that's what we'll like to discuss today and talk about and elaborate on. I'm going to talk a bit about my own work to start with, and then I'm going to invite others on stage, and then we're going to lead into a discussion and a Q&A. Actually, I can stand here. Maybe I can pose like my picture. I know. Excuse me. Ah, that's the last slide. All right. Can you go to the... Yeah, thanks. So, my background is I'm a mechanical engineer and subsequently got into product design. But for my bachelor's thesis and then for a while after that, I built biogas digesters that take food waste and turn it into cooking gas, turn it into energy. And I was using that as a tool of for teaching making in schools in South India. So I'll talk about it. Oh, okay. So should I point at you and then... Okay. No, go back. All right. The second slide. So, for example, here's some children. We needed to build something with concrete. So I brought all the ingredients and I brought it on site. And I left to get some other stuff, and I came back, and the kids had already mixed the concrete. And I had no idea how they learned to do that. So I spoke to them about it, and they said that, yeah, whenever someone's building a house somewhere, we go and we mess around, so we know how to work with this stuff. And that was really interesting. So that sort of got me thinking about, okay, how can I not just be building a unit that then gets transported into this place and then the students work on it, but rather get them involved in the work and make them a part of building it and running it. This is the dirty work. This is them getting, 50 kgs, 100 pounds of cow dung from nearby houses because we needed that to start the bacteria culture in the biogas plant. This is another kid playing with concrete. The idea being that it's not just the content of making. I think other people also had this theme in their talks. It's not just about what you are making, but the act of making itself that that brings a sense of confidence and creativity in yourself and your work. So this is the kids assembling the biogas plant at a school, and this is again cow dung. My presentation is mostly pictures so that I'm not boring. This was me installing a stove, and the kids stole my phone, and then there were like 50 selfies by the end of it. This is what the final product looks like. So food waste goes into the big pipe, and then overnight it turns into, through a series of processes and different bacteria cultures, it turns into a gas, which is primarily methane, which is the flammable component, and carbon dioxide. And you can have different sizes according to how many children there are in the school. So in India, there's something called the midday meal scheme, where children are given food at school. So the idea was that the waste food from the first day gets put into the plant at the end of the day, and then is used to cook the meal the next day. This is a plant at an orphanage. This was it was an underground plant, and some unexpected challenges that you can have with this kind of work, where I installed this and I left. I came back 3 days later after seeding it with the cow dung, came back 3 days later to see how it was doing, and there were footprints on this tank, like tiny footprints. The kids had been jumping on it and bouncing around because it was a tank with gas in floating in a liquid. It was a fun little jungle gym sort of, I don't even know, sort of thing. So I had to wall it up so that someone doesn't slip in. So this is how it started. I first built a plant for myself using a manual that I found on a site about making home improvement stuff, DIY. So going from there, making a plant, using it, doing some research on it, and then going to selling it. And I think I'm going to go a bit off topic here, but I think the way it started and why it's relevant is that before I did this, I bought a piece of junk from a scrapyard, and I made it into this over the course of 1 year. And it was a labor of love. It took a lot of sleepless nights, and it was great fun. But more importantly, this thing didn't, because it was so precious to me, it didn't just sit in my garage. It went all over the country with just me on it. And having taken some pieces of junk from different places, put them together, and turned them into something that gave me some of my best days in college, gave me the confidence that my hands are worth something. And if I can trust what I do for myself, then I can trust that to be useful to customers, and to actually go out and say that a thin, measly little kid, I'm going to build something in your house that creates fire that you can then use, and it would work. The first time a biogas plant would create gas, would be lit and be used, for some reason it was always tea. People would make tea, and that first cup of tea where you sit down and it's all done, and you sit down and you have that cup of tea, which is coming from the sweat and dirt that you got on your hands for the last week or so. I think that makes it all worth it, and I think that's what the satisfaction and labor of making is all about. I'm going to end with the experience of talking to kids about sustainability and making, and I'm going to leave with this. Thank you. So I'd like to invite Heather next to talk about her work with cheese. It's really exciting stuff. You should listen to it. You can also point this at John if you like.
Okay. Okay. But I can't see what slide's coming next, so this will be an interesting experiment. All right. Hi, I'm pleased to be here. Thinking about working with nature is something I've done as an anthropologist on and off for several years now. So the first thing is to tell you that I am not a cheesemaker. I'm an anthropologist who studied American artisan cheesemaking over the course of several years. People like that. Let's see if and wrote a book. The Life of Cheese, Crafting Food and Value in America. So the other thing I want to start by letting you know, what do I point this at? There. You. Okay. Today happens coincidentally to be International Raw Milk Cheese Appreciation Day. Why might there need to be a Raw Milk Cheese Appreciation Day, you may wonder? Well, over the last 2 decades, periodically we get frightening notices like this that the FDA is out to get artisan cheese making. So I just want to quickly, in 5 minutes, give you a little bit of overview of the history of cheese making in the United States, like 2 minutes worth of that, and then think about sort of competing or different relationships to thinking about working with nature in food making, and in particular in working with fermented foods that helps us to understand this. You can't really see it, but these are two sort of representative quotes of the sort of extremes of, we could say, the two sides of an ongoing debate. On the left, raw milk cheese is like playing Russian roulette with your health, which is an infamous quote from a former FDA official from 2004. Again, this is not a new controversy. This is an ongoing controversy. And on the right, equally provocative, raw milk cheese is one of the most beautiful and romantic links between human beings and the earth that we will ever know. From Steve Jenkins, who is has been the head of the cheese program at Fairways Market in Manhattan, some of you may know. So there's a lot of strong feelings, strong beliefs, and strong emotions on both sides of what we could think of as the raw milk divide. So first of all, I just want to point out that raw milk cheese is a modern invention. Now, we've just heard that, of course, working with these organic agencies is an ancient practice. Cheese is an ancient food. Why do I say raw milk cheese is a modern invention? Because it's not raw milk cheese as a category without its opposite, pasteurized milk cheese, right? So before the advent of pasteurization, pasteurization and cheese making required the laboratory isolation and cultivation of strains of bacteria cultures that would start the fermentation process and develop flavors. So you couldn't work with pasteurized milk to make cheese until you had the techniques to reintroduce the strains that you wanted. And that's 1880s that was sort of developed, and then really sort of took off in the early 1900s. So before then, all cheese was made with unpasteurized milk. So it wasn't marked. It wasn't a marked category. That's what I mean, right? Raw milk cheese wasn't a meaningful category until it was the opposite of working with pasteurized milk, which of course was introduced to save lives. There was plenty of tuberculosis and so on and so forth, propagated through the milk shed. And it was really heralded. Also, pasteurization was introduced in cheese making, not just for safety, but even more for economy. So you could use milk sourced from larger farms from greater distances, create cheese that could then be distributed regionally instead of just locally. So there were economic reasons behind this. So I'll just skip that. I think I have enough. So, so historically, right in the 1900s, 20th century, pasteurized milk cheese becomes more and more lends itself to processing, more and more standardization, and let's just say maybe a more boring food product, and then, but a safe one. Nobody is worried about getting sick from eating slices of Kraft, cheese. Fair enough. But in the 1970s, so in the United States, unlike in Europe, raw milk cheese making was really replaced. Farmstead cheese making, working with raw milk, was replaced wholesale by increasingly industrial cheese making. And then in the 70s and 80s, as part of the Back to the Land movement, on-farm cheese making was reintroduced, and American cheesemakers had to relearn how to work with raw milk. So just briefly, what does it mean to work with raw milk? Well, first is the idea, I'll just leave this for now. Instead of thinking of the uncharacterized microbial world is full of harm and danger, that because we can control it, we should control it, which is what dairy, the dairy industry and food safety has been predicated on for the last 100 years. The idea that the organic agencies are diverse and potentially beneficial, and if we learn about them, we can work with them instead of in opposition to them, to create a diversity of food, right? Not just the standardization that we had become accustomed to. But in practice, what does that mean? Well, cheesemakers talked to me about having a feel for the curd. So the idea is that you bring environmental, natural influences into the cheese-making process instead of trying to eradicate them and have full control of all the inputs that are going into the process. So having a feel for the curd, having a feel for how your milk responds to particular cultures within a particular, if it's humid outside and hot, it's going to behave differently than if it's like it's been today, 50 degrees and dry, right? So you have to know how to work with those variables to adjust your technique instead of trying to adjust all the variables so that they're consistent and so that the process works the same every time. Instead, you learn how to adjust your technique to the variables to try to produce as consistent a product as possible. So just a few slides. The other thing is to think about the wheel of cheese as an environmental ecosystem that like a pasture is diverse and has lots of things going on in sort of relationship to each other, thinking about the wheel of cheese in the same way. And again, sort of controlling the environment of humidity and temperature to facilitate the growth of the microorganisms that you want so that they will outcompete the ones that you don't. So, high-tech stuff here, managing humidity with the plastic sheeting, things like that. But very watchful. It's not letting things go wild at all, right? It's a controlled experiment in a sense. Okay. The other aspect is lots and lots of hygiene. Okay, you do need to have a clean facility to keep the stuff out that you don't want. I'm trying to click. So 80% of cheese making is washing dishes or basically sanitizing things. I was told repeatedly. A few cheesemakers I met said, if I had any idea I'd be spending all my time, washing forms and things like this, I never would have gone into it. So hygiene is crucial. So I can talk about this later, ecologies of production, but that's what generates this diversity of cheeses, is learning how to work with the diversity of environmental and microbial variables instead of trying to produce standardization from the very beginning. Okay, thanks. I have no idea how long that was. I hope
Oh, it's good. Thank you, Heather. I love the idea that the artisanal stuff of making cheese with your hands is actually more complex than the industrial stuff, and how the complexity is perceived in a very, very hands-on, with the hand, with the texture or with smell or whatever it may be. That's really interesting. Next, I'd like to invite Kevin Yuen, whose startup Modern Meadows works on biofabricated leather.
Hey everyone, how's everyone doing? Good, all right. Well, happy to be here today, and really happy to talk to you about Modern Meadow and what we do. So I'd like to actually start off with a story about us and about the development of civilization, right? And when you look around us, in terms of the materials that we use, that we wear, it's actually a reflection of who we are and what we value. Next slide. Yep, so when you look across the timeline, each new era is brought on by a new material, and it speaks to the human progress that's been made in that era. Next. So in the Stone Age, for example, cavemen wore animal hides, right? They used cotton, wool, and all of these are actually frequently used today. Now let's fast forward and enter the Industrial Revolution, right? We became more sophisticated in terms of the tools and the innovations that we had, whether it was the innovations in metallurgy, the smelting of steel, but also alongside that, we were really skilled in developing new fabrics, right? Especially with new machinery like the loom. Let's fast forward again to the information age, right? With the emergence of semiconductors, the PCs, mobile phones. But in parallel, we actually made a lot of progress in composite materials, synthetics, advanced polymers, for example, right? And a lot of them you actually see in our everyday textiles. So let me ask you a question. What is the future and what's next? So it's only appropriate to look to one of the greatest thought leaders of our time, Steve Jobs. And towards the end of his life, he noted that the greatest innovations will happen in the intersection of biology and technology. So everyone, welcome to the era of biofabrication, right? And it's only possible with the advances of biology, design, and engineering integrated that this is able to happen. And Modern Meadow is leading this movement and starting with bioleather materials. So I have a question. Who here has heard of biofabrication? Oh, great. Advanced. So biofabrication is building with biology, with purpose, right? And what's really cool is in this new era, we can actually use advanced technologies and reinvent some of the materials using nature's building blocks to make them better in smarter and more efficient ways, right? And so how do we do it? There are three key steps. Design, we grow, and we assemble. Now, let's take a step back. What is leather? Leather is animal skin, and it's actually comprised of collagen. And collagen is actually one of the most abundant proteins in skin. In human skin, it's what creates our structure of skin. It makes it radiate. But essentially what we do is, in the design phase, we actually have a strain engineering team that programs the DNA of yeast and inserts it so it creates collagen. And then we put the yeast and the selected yeast into these big vats called fermenters, right? It's actually very not dissimilar to brewing beer or alcohol, but instead of brewing these liquids, it brews collagen. And then finally, we assemble. So our material science team and our design team work together to assemble the collagen into the different forms and surfaces. And so, slide back. So this is really what we can do with biofabrication, right? We can start, altering the topology and the surface of the leather materials. We can make different shapes and colors. And with our process, what's interesting is we can experiment with different formats. So on the right-hand side, you see us, drizzling leather in a form of a lace. And over here, we can actually spray leather on silk in different textiles. So there's a lot that we can do with biofabrication. Next. So biofabrication is awesome, right? And we think that it's a winning proposition across different stakeholders, right? For manufacturers, Instead of the process being subtractive, now it's additive, right? And we can actually eliminate some of the waste that's being created in the industry. Instead of waiting for a cow to be grown in 2 years and then shipping the hides, across the world to be tanned, now we can produce leather materials in 2 weeks and potentially in the future localized production. And for designers, instead of being constrained by the animal hide, now we can engineer it to form with different properties. And for consumers, instead of not knowing where your material is coming from, now we can make the whole process transparent. And then sustainability should not be a compromise, but instead it should be a premium. And for the earth, aligned with the panel today, instead of extracting from life, now we're co-creating with it. And this is just the beginning, right? So we recently launched our brand of bio-leather materials. It's called Zoa, and it's derived from the word Zoe in Greek, which means life. And we actually commissioned a piece at MoMA in their fashion exhibit. Items is fashion modern, and we were commissioned to redesign the graphic tee. We also are starting to engage the design and public community, and we actually had a Soho pop-up to showcase some of our prototypes. And now I have a short video that was showcased at MoMA and the pop-up. So thank you, everyone, and imagine the possibilities of biofabrication. Thanks.
That is so cool. Thanks, Kevin. Next, I'm going to have Meghan on stage, and she's going to talk about her work with cosmetics.
Yay. Okay, we'll see if this works for me. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm a second-year IDM student. So my presentation is both about research I've done for my thesis, which is on the social and environmental impact of the skincare industry, and also the process of starting a company while being a grad student at MIT. So 1 out of 3 Americans have had an allergic reaction to a skincare product. So when they go to choose something in a drugstore, in a Sephora, it's like rolling the dice. They don't really know what effect it's going to have on their skin or on their wallet. So people have cabinets that end up looking like this. And Vaseline did a study that estimates that women throw away $100,000 worth of unused skincare products in their lifetime. So it's not just being thrown away, it doesn't work, but also all of those chemicals and all of that toxic stuff ends up going into our environment and into our oceans and affecting aquatic life. Not to mention it's super inefficient. So the root of the problem is that people don't know what skincare to choose that works for their unique and changing skin. Skin is complex. It changes based on your location, your hormones. There are a lot of factors. People don't really know how to connect their own skin attributes to ingredients that work for them, or reading a label is kind of like reading a foreign language. And perhaps most importantly, the industry is kind of broken because the way the current model works is that it's focused primarily on marketing and selling products based on general archetypes, when realistically there's not enough focus on if those products are actually working or if they're actually safe for that individual. So that's what we're focused on the most, is kind of measuring the efficacy of if a product is actually working and is safe for that person. So a quick zoom out for some work I did in my sustainability-oriented innovation class about like why does this problem exist. So part of the causes is kind of like our economy and fast impulse buying, the accessibility of more sustainable and safer products. A big one that we're focused on is the lack of consumer education, both about people's own skin health and also about ingredients, as well as there's a lot of greenwashing and lack of regulation. So what happens is not only waste but of like throwing products away, but also people spend a ton of money trying to figure it out for themselves. And as I mentioned before, the consequences are really high, especially for people who have had allergic reactions, have skin allergies or conditions like eczema. And then in addition, like some of the chemicals, because they're not regulated by the government, can cause cancer or other like kind of terrible things for our health. So we think that skincare and consumer products are going to move into what's happened with food, where consumers are starting to become more aware and pay more attention because our skin's our largest organ. So what we use actually really matters for our health. So at Atola Skin Lab, what we're doing is using machine learning and data science to recommend and create personalized products, and also most importantly measure how they're working. So there's 3 basic steps. One is that we take data, which I'll talk a little bit more about, and kind of analyze measures of people's skin health, tell them what it means, what ingredients they should be using together, or most importantly, what ingredients they should avoid. We use that information to make a product just for them, and we measure exactly how it's working and how their skin might be changing over time. And it's kind of a sort of like a feedback loop so that we can make skincare that's really adaptive. My other thought is that making targeted skincare for people will reduce some of this waste and this trial and error of like buying and trying 100 different products, trying to find the right one that works for you. So a little bit about the data we collect. Currently, we have an in-person process. We're working on developing an app as well, but it's pretty special because we collect this data and kind of on the spot run it through our machine learning algorithm and are able to share and show that information about people's skin health with them and kind of use that information and co-create the product with the person. So first, we take some environmental data about them, where they live, how old they are, what other products they're using, what they're concerned about. We also measure their dermal data, so we take oil, moisture, pH, and then we use machine vision to quantify some of their different skin issues. And eventually, we want to add diet and other health data. So as I mentioned, we kind of like run all of that information on the spot through our machine learning algorithm, which outputs best matched ingredients and kind of dosage rules that we developed along with estheticians and dermatologists. And we also capture something that's really important too in thinking about skincare, which is people's preferences. So we have a bunch of ingredients on the spot and they're able to try different things, and we record how it feels, how it smells, because you could create the best product for someone, but if they don't like how it feels on their skin, they're not going to use it. So this is an example of our first product, which is a natural facial serum. But I think the other cool thing that we're doing is basically creating a longitudinal and holistic view of someone's skin health, and eventually not just measuring how our own product is working, but being able to look at the interactions between different products, being able to look at how someone's skin and their needs might change if they moved from Boston to LA, for example, and also providing them with a baseline on which to measure their skin health like any other skin metric or any other health metric, as well as give tips on what they should do that day. And I think this is what's really missing in the industry. As I mentioned before, the focus is mostly on marketing and kind of making outrageous claims that might not be super relevant to an individual person's need. So I think it really needs to stop focusing on trying to force sell things to people. That doesn't make sense, and actually measure, sort of like a clinical trial on an individual level, how something actually works. So that's what we're doing, but as an MIT student, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we built it, and I think the MIT Maker Faire has been really special for us because that was the first time we kind of tested our experience last year. So it started as an IDM project in our studio class, and the basic question before any of the technology was just, is this a powerful experience that people would like if we told them more about their skin and also made a product just for them? So being that it was a design studio, we thought a lot about what would the experience look like that was both educational and kind of immersive and fun. And so we actually, like in studio, kind of taped out the entire thing before we built anything to see how it would flow, to imagine how we might actually set this up, because nothing like this currently exists. It's sort of between like a beauty counter at a store, plus a bar where you get a drink made for you, plus so kind of the whole experience, especially because there's so many different steps of data collection, keeping it tight and also trying to keep it under like 10 minutes per person and still making them feel really special and like they're kind of co-creating this product with you was kind of crucial for us. So this is actually a picture of us at the MIT Maker Faire last year, which was kind of like towards the end of our semester where we actually built out and were making products on the spot. This was kind of our first version of like how we might represent and communicate someone's skin data to them and something that they could take home. So sort of sharing with them some basic information about their dermal skin data. So instead of just categorizing someone as having oily skin or having dry skin, think about it more continuously and being able to like measure that change, as well as what did they best match with. And I have a short video kind of about like some of the insights that we learned last year doing this, which is really kind of monumental for us. Initial formulations. We were lucky enough to have on our team one of my classmates who started a cosmetics company, so what's now machine learning was all in her brain of kind of customizing it for each person, which was really cool.
I think it's really cool because I know what my skin is like and I get to see exactly what's going into my oil. So
nice that I could know more about oil before making oil by myself, like smell it or
only follow the computer, the data. They actually come and talk to you, show you which one that you try different type, which I think is nice.
I think it's good that like you are incorporating more of a customer experience into the decision making, because I think it gives the customer more ownership in what the product they're buying.
A really great retail product. What I'd love to see is I would love to see these being out as testers and you guys doing a more standardized line on top of this.
Like you feel like you have more control and it's a bit more fun, so you can do something yourself while also, having some help so you don't feel like you're gonna mess anything up at the same time. So it's very nice.
I definitely enjoy process of choosing my own formulation. I like that there is some research and some science behind this.
You can control whatever you're making.
I could both, sense it, I could feel for myself and experience it, as well as understand kind of the different oils that went in and the properties of each oil. So it was very informative, so I feel like an informed customer.
Yeah, so I thought actually getting tested on the skin was quite straightforward. I liked that there were two types of chemicals that were applied, so I could personally feel that one was working better than the other. This component where we're actually making the peels, I would say I'd prefer someone doing it for me and just get it after I was convinced that these percentages were the best ones. I also like that you asked additional questions of what other medications I was using or other lotions, so you could adjust.
We got a lot of good feedback is the point. But yeah, so that was pretty much exactly a year ago. So from then we've filed a patent on our machine learning technology. We've done about 10 other events, both at spas, at retailers, at WeWork. We have close to 1,000 data points now, which is a pretty cool number where we're starting to see some cool insights. Have over 100 paying customers. This is what we built for our final review for IDM. And our branding has changed a little bit to become more gender neutral, but I think that the continuous focus on staying in touch with the customer and also thinking about using data in a different way to actually empower people and be really transparent about what that means and have better health outcomes and involve them in the process is really key, especially in thinking about a lot of what goes on with the data behind our backs. So yeah, the MIT Maker Faire was really awesome for us as kind of like a leap to us now doing an accelerator in the summer, fundraising, and making this a real business. So thanks.
No. Thank you so much, Meg. That was so interesting. I'd like to invite all the speakers on stage for a short discussion and some Q&A. Thank you all so much for coming and for your super interesting work. I think the theme that we've tried to have through this event is making, of course, but the process of making and the barriers to making and how the self changes through that process. So I think the first question I'd like to pose to all of you is, what are some of the challenges that you faced in building with things that are not conventionally associated with the art of making or making of things in general, and how did you overcome them?
Okay, I can answer first. So I think obviously our biggest challenge as a team is the fact that myself and my co-founders are designers and data scientists respectively. We are not skin scientists. So I think that while we had an amazing concept that's pretty new for the industry, we really needed to find the industry expertise to make sure that everything we were building on the technology side was still safe and based on actual dermatology and skin science. So for us, that meant kind of recruiting industry advisors and spending a lot of time thinking about who we could have, and also making those perspectives diverse. So especially because our brand is in between kind of natural and very scientific and futuristic with some of the machine learning stuff, being able to balance out our advisors and hear multiple opinions, so we kind of stayed in the spot that we wanted to be in.
Yeah, I think for us, it's biofabrication is such a new field. No one's really done it before, and so how do we actually educate the consumers of what we're doing, right? And positioning ZOA so that people understand, hey, this is a new process, right? And we're working with nature, so really in that light. Another challenge that we have is really I think biofabrication is really at the intersection of design, engineering, and biology. So really it's about the communication across these different disciplines that makes us work. And so as we grow, that's something really that we're really cognizant about, of how do we keep that communication so that we're all learning as a whole.
Can I ask Kevin a question? A follow-up? Okay. I want to know. I wanted to ask this after your presentation, but like, who are your first customers, and like, out of those disciplines, who are the people that are the most excited about it?
Yeah, so we've had over 200 brands reach out to us. Everyone's like pretty excited about the notion of biofabricated leather. Right now, we expect to commercial product in the next few years, but working with big brands, right? Especially in the luxury and performance. And something that we need to be cognizant of is the cost, right? So right now we're in lab scale, but as we scale this process, the cost becomes cheaper and more economical to make. And so really, it's really about positioning our product at a higher price point, right, with the brand equity and really showcasing the possibility of ZOA, and then really going down the cost curve for more larger markets.
Well, speaking on behalf of the people who make cheese and not myself again, the biggest challenge, especially with working with raw milk, is consistency. So obviously, a certain degree of variability is part of the artisan aesthetic and the artisan process that's valued, but only to a certain point, right? The product also has to resemble itself. It has to be self-similar enough that, these are not cheap food. It's not cheap food, right? So you spend $25 a pound on a piece of cheese, once, and you really like it, and you go back and you want to get it again, and you have people coming over and you're really excited, and you bring it home and it's really salty, or it's kind of dried out, or it's like it's more mature than when you had it before, and it does not taste the same, right? So there's a lot of education of the consumer to some extent to appreciate that variability, and I imagine there's some variability in your product too that is part of that. How do you market it, right? Right. So it just really, and so the market is an important part, right, of the production in a way when we're talking about a commercial product. So if you're selling in a farmer's market, and most of this artisan cheese is actually sold in really local markets, and you won't have heard of it unless you live really locally. And you can sample the product, right? So I would never buy an expensive cheese without tasting that piece first, right? Because it is going to be different. So if you're selling, in a place where you can sample that good, then you have a lot more leeway with variability. But if you're trying to get into Whole Foods and they really want the same product week after week, then you have to be much more concerned about that consistency, and you might actually have a lot more wastage of the product because you can't actually market everything under the same name. So I don't know if you want to speak at all to... Okay.
That's great. You can keep it. Going from there, because I think reliability was another issue that I faced with my work, that a lot of times the plants would stop working and then it would take a lot of time to get them back online. And how do you explain that this is a natural process, that it needs to be taken care of? I think going from there, what I'd like to know is what motivated you to work with something that's so hard to work with?
I didn't have to do it.
Okay. So I have super sensitive skin. I have an autoimmune condition that affects my skin. So before I started Atolla, I was kind of keeping a skin diary myself, obsessively writing down, like, what was I eating today? What was I doing today? Like, what happened? Trying to, like, do some, like, sleuthing on my own, which was basically impossible. One of my co-founders has eczema, and so I think that we were all kind of motivated to tackle this problem of measuring efficacy, which is like a notoriously hard problem even in like medicine, because we all wanted to know for ourselves, and we lived it every day. So I think our personal motivations to want to be healthy and also want to figure out of all of the probably billions of products that exist, like what do we look for?
I think for me, sustainability has always been a priority. And so, with my background in biology, it's how do we merge those two kind of priorities together. And so, hearing about Modern Meadow, I think one of the key things is we're not trying to imitate leather, right? Leather is a great material that has evolved for so many years, but now with biofabrication, what's innovative can we do, right? That doesn't exist today. And so with the different prototypes that I showed, we can spray it on silk, for example. We can drizzle it to make different forms, for example. That's really interesting. It's like the value that we can provide for the consumer rather than just sustainability, but it's great for the earth.
Maybe you can speak for the people that you, what you suppose their motivations.
The motivations, well, they're very varied. So that's certainly something that I found in my research. And to some extent, I think there's a bit of a generational shift. So let's say the earlier wave of people who got into artisan cheesemaking in the 70s and early 80s were primarily motivated by seeking self-sustainable, economically self-sustainable rural ways of life. So coming out of the Back to the Land movement, some of the photos I showed you was a sheep dairy farm in Vermont. It's land that this farmer, whatever, he has a degree from Harvard in engineering, and went back to his parents, the land where he grew up in Vermont, and just wanted to make a living on the land kind of thing. And long story short, but for that first rave, it was about the land, it was about the animals. There's all these goat ladies who loved their goats, and they wanted the goats to pay for themselves, and that's really how they got into cheese making. And then they sort of developed a market for American artisan cheese, sort of put it on the map, got chefs interested in it, and then subsequent generations are my former students, basically, a generation of liberal arts college graduates who wanted to, put into practice the sort of ideals of alternative economics and sustainability that they had learned in school. And then people who were in love with the cheese and were sort of foodies and wanted to sort of, again, walk the walk. But there's this sort of successive waves of these motivational trends, although there's a lot of heterogeneity there.
Thank you. I can take some questions from the crowd now, if anyone has any questions.
I guess this question is for everybody. To kind of move the goals forward of whatever kind of working with nature that you're speaking about, what kind of resources or changes would kind of make the most difference? More regulation, less regulation, more scientists, more money, more knowledge among consumers? What would be your big ask if someone had a magic wand?
For us, I think regulation would only be a part. So I think that places that have better regulation like the EU are closer than we are, but I think what would make a bigger difference is consumer education. So I compared it to what's happening in food and people starting to pay more attention about the ingredients that are in their food. And also sort of just a shift in business models. I think that this is kind of across consumer products, not just skincare, but to really have longer term relationships with people that are not just focused on selling and kind of the high turnover of customers in the industry, but having a long-term relationship with someone, knowing what they like, knowing what works with them, and kind of through that being able to promote goals of health and kind of change the focus from trying to sell the most to really have the longest relationship and best relationship with the customers.
I think for us, and I think it speaks to the whole consumer biotech community as well, but really the diversity of talent, right? And what I mean by that is there's so much potential for people who are not in biotech to get involved with biotech, right? Right now in our company, our chief creative officer, Suzanne Lee, she's a fashion designer, and she sits right next to the people who make the cells and the ones that make the materials, right? And it's really that translation of what can we do with biotech? And so perhaps it's the lowering of the barriers to get educated on, hey, what are the biological fundamentals, right, for the rest of the population? But also it's getting more people to really engage in biotech and be interested in it. So that would really help shift or advance the whole industry forward.
Well, in terms of the regulation question for cheese making, it's a complicated question, but the regulation, safety regulation, regulates all sectors the same way. It's a one-size-fits-all regulatory framework in terms of artisan production, industrial production, and so there's not a very good fit. But it's a very challenging puzzle because to classify cheese is pretty much a losing battle. So there's an ongoing question about how best to regulate for the safety. And then, yeah, I would, when I did this research, which was 10 years ago now, one of the things I would have said and they said was single-payer healthcare, was healthcare, health insurance for these small business owners. I don't know what that's looking like right now.
I think I can. Yeah, I can. I think it's also the responsibility of the people doing the work to make consistent, high-quality products that can compete with traditional products. I think that's really important. You can't just rely on the idea that something is more natural or green. Sell something just for the sake of its environmental or ecosystem benefits, but I think people prefer when the thing that they've bought, so like the artisanal cheese, it tastes better, or the biofabricated leather is actually higher quality, and the skincare product is more suited to your skin. These are all products which are better than what you can get in the market, and I think that's something to do. That's really important. That should be done. Next question, please.
So the first speaker, his talked about a lot of these things happening over in India. I was wondering how the other three speakers felt that maybe the things that they focused on, how they might move into markets that aren't, as privileged as, say, America.
So one thing that we are trying to focus on and think about long term is that we have the potential to create a lot of insights, especially around diversity and including communities who are traditionally ignored by the larger global beauty industry through the data that we're collecting. And essentially what we can build is a database that determines the most effective and safest product for people based on their skin attributes. And I think that knowledge is useful not just for us as a company, but that we could leverage that in other countries to kind of help companies who might not have the same access to data or other technologies figure out exactly what are the best products to develop or where the opportunities might be suited, instead of, again, perpetuating the larger problem of continuing to create products that don't work for specific people and end up ultimately being thrown away. So I really feel like while we would never be in the business of selling people's data, we can always help provide insights, or in the future leverage what we know to help other communities make safer choices and better product development.
I think there are two parts to the answer. The first is really looking at the market, and as we think about our cost curves going down, as we get scale and economies of scale, we're able to produce our product that are cheaper and more economical. So I think this product, it's not U.S. centric, it's global, right? And we do see some of the countries like India, China as big markets for biofabricated leather materials. And the next step is really about economic development too. I mean, a lot of the tanneries are in India, right? And so as you think about localized production in the future of different tanneries, you can actually have biofabricated leather manufacturers all over the world, right? In these places as well, to have a more sustainable process. So that's something that we're definitely thinking of in the future, and hopefully that's it's a winning proposition for everyone.
Well, cheese, of course, is not strictly an American. And it was an international raw milk cheese appreciation day. I mean, they really, Old Ways, among other organizations, Slow Food is certainly another, are really trying to network among artisan producers in various countries to not only to compare notes on best practices, but to work together in terms of some of these regulatory questions which impact trade and so forth. There's a burgeoning artisan cheese movement in South America. And actually a place I was a little bit surprised, where there's a lot of activity and a revival of farmstead on-farm cheese making is Russia, and that's a consequence of the fairly recent sanctions. European cheeses are not being exported to Russia anymore, but cheese consultants and cheese equipment are. So there's a big resurgence of on-farm cheesemaking in Russia right now using European techniques and recipes. It's pretty surreal, actually.
I'd like to ask Kevin, does your leather process eliminate chemical tanning, or does it still require that?
So we're experimenting with all sorts of tanning, and that includes chrome, but also includes vegetable, and we're agnostic of the different processes. But we are working with our materials science team to make the process as we scale as sustainable as possible. Right?
I'd like to invite Jamie on stage for some closing remarks.
You're wrapping up. Okay, cool. Thank you so much, guys, for being part of this panel. It's the end of MITxMake. This wraps it up, and I just want to thank everyone who has come, and who I also want to thank my committee members who are very busy, kind of dismantling everything now because we are on a very rushed schedule to give this venue to the next Cambridge Science Festival event. But I just want to say that MITxMake has never. It was never meant to be the largest festival. There are maker fairs and maker festivals aplenty, but what we really want to do is that since over the past few years, maker culture, or what we really want to focus on, maker cultures, has really kind of gained traction all over the world. And MIT has such an influence on these cultures. And as students, we really want to take a more active role in really reflecting what making is for, why we make and what we make, and also the processes. And I feel like, for example, Heather is kind of taught us so much about the processes of cheese and all the consideration of the politics behind it, and really helps us reflect on all these issues. And Kevin and Meghan has shown us some of the exciting things that MIT education, MIT resources can really kind of bring. And so I hope that we will continue conversing on these issues, on thinking about making more diversely, and also thinking about the diversity of maker cultures. And I hope to see you next year. We hope that MIT Make will continue to be an annual event, and also an opportunity for collective reflection. We hope that this will continue to be a space for MIT to learn from what communities nearby are doing, and also for communities to learn about what MIT do. And we also really hope that MIT Make in the future years will be able to be free in order to be truly kind of accessible, inclusive, and sustainable events, and also to focus on those issues. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you so much for everyone who's made this happen. Thank you so much. And the team is over the place there in the white shirts with the logo, so give them a shout out. Thank you so much, guys.
Simple so far. wishing the nothing's was gone.